called Putting APA Style into Practice, Tips for Integrating Style into Your Curriculum. And we are so excited today to share this information with you. First, a bit about our presenters. So there's going to be three of us talking today. First, me, Chelsea Lee. I'm the instructional lead for APA Style. We'll also be having Timothy McAdoo, who is the manager for APA Style, and Samantha Denny, who is the development manager for APA Style. So we're going to start out with a poll of how do you require APA Style in your curriculum? And options here are I don't require APA Style, require it generally, or requiring students to use official APA resources. So that, here we go. The poll question should be on your screen now. And we'll give you a few more seconds to log your answers in. It's great to see how much participation we have. Wonderful. All right, let's end the poll. We've got a good participation rate. So you can see the results on the screen. We've got a small percentage, about 5%, who are not requiring APA Style, and then 43% requiring APA Style generally, and 58% requiring students to use official APA resources. So thanks for sharing that with us. Okay. Next, we're going to go over our agenda for today. Pretty simple. First, we're going to talk about how to explain APA Style. Then we're going to share 9 tips for integrating APA Style into your curriculum. Then we're going to share APA Style resources for your syllabus and your classroom website. And at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A session. So I'll start us off with how to explain APA Style. So there's 3 principles of APA Style that we want you to focus on, and these are clarity, precision, and inclusion. All of the guidelines that make up APA Style really boil down to these 3 principles. And the goal of these principles is to help you, no matter if you're a student or a researcher or an educator, whatever kind of professional you are, to communicate in a way that allows your ideas to come through and your meaning to be understood. We've had over 50 years of development with the APA Style manuals, hundreds of pages in our publication manual, millions of copies sold, and the goal is excellence in communication. So if you can organize yourself around clarity, precision, and inclusion, that's where to start. So let's look at these each individually. First, let's talk about what it means to be clear. Being clear is explaining yourself logically in language that your readers are going to understand. It's following spelling and grammar conventions. It's avoiding distractions and confusion that can be caused by having ideas in the wrong order, or having ideas omitted that should be there, or ideas that are in the paper but maybe they don't belong in that paper. For example, if you're writing a literature review, you would want to provide a holistic view of what the science says about your topic, rather than cherry picking what information that you want to present. You want to clearly show science as it is. Likewise, if you have conducted an experiment and you're presenting the results of that, you want to describe your methodology in detail so that other people could replicate your work if they wanted to, or they could evaluate whether you did a good job in the way that you ran your experiment. So transparency. So that's another way that clarity is shown. A style tip for achieving clarity is to have other people read your writing and describe back to you what you said. And if they get it spot on, that's a great sign that your writing is clear. And if they're not sure or they're missing things, The points of confusion are going to indicate where you could be more clear. And if you have students who are in the process of writing, going to a writing center can be a great way to get other people to read your writing and give you this feedback. But of course, you can also pursue that more informally with your colleagues or your friends or anyone in your life who's going to want to help you with your writing. Next, let's look at what it means to be precise. So being precise means choosing words that are at the right level of specificity for what you're trying to communicate. And oftentimes the nouns and verbs that people choose are too broad and too vague, and they need to be more specific. So let's have an example. Say some people do not have internet access. The noun people is very general. Internet access could also be more specifically defined. There's, of course, lots of ways that you could become more precise with this, but one way that would be much more precise would be to say Native Americans living on tribal reservations are less likely to have access to high-speed internet than maybe like people living in urban areas. And so there we've specified who the people are, what kind of internet access we mean. Another really common form of imprecision to be aware of is the editorial we, which is when you use we to refer to people in general. For example, you might say, we all want to succeed in life. Well, who do you mean by we? And like for moreover, what do you mean by succeed? You could be more specific. You might say in a more precise sentence, many American people consider themselves successful if they have a prestigious job and a high salary. And then maybe you might go on and explain how like there's other ways people might define success, like satisfaction with your home life. A third way to think about precision is when you're presenting numbers and statistics. So rather than saying approximations of quantity like most or a lot, if you can give specific numbers that are coming from credible sources, so you might say 95% of people, whatever. So a style tip for examining your work for precision is to go through your sentences, especially topic sentences of your paragraphs, and checking for use of editorial we, checking for vague language, and checking for approximations. Third, let's look at what it means to be inclusive. Inclusive language is describing people with dignity and respect. It's about choosing appropriately specific terms. For example, if you mean to describe any person, you should use a word like person, rather than being like, all men and women should, go to the, meet us in the lobby. You should say all people should meet us in the lobby, because in that situation, you want to encompass everyone. Likewise, if you're describing specific people, you want to use the terms that those people use. So it's using the language that people use to describe themselves. And that applies to any aspect of a person. So it would be their name, their pronouns, their gender, their sexual orientation, their race and ethnicity, whatever qualities a person has, you would use the language that they use to describe them. And a really important style tip for inclusive language use is to use singular they when you're describing a generic or hypothetical person. So instead of saying he or she or he/she, or like those combinations trying to put both pronouns in, just using singular they is straightforward. It's been used in speech and literature for hundreds and hundreds of years. The gendered pronouns make people think of people of that gender. And so if you don't mean to imply gender, it could be anyone, you should use the singular they in your APA style writing. So now we've laid the groundwork for these principles of APA style, and now we're going to talk over some tips for implementing them in your writing, which Tim and Samantha are going to talk to you about.
Thank you, Chelsea. So first I wanted to say happy Teacher Appreciation Week to all of our teachers attending today. Thanks for spending some time with us. Our first tip is to teach the use of reference books, which I'm sure you already do, but so you know that, and your students are familiar with dictionaries and encyclopedias being reference books that they use when they need them. At the point of need, you look up what you need when you need it. And that's how we use the publication manual as well, and the concise guide. So we recommend that approach for you and your students. The books are organized into chapters that roughly mimic these steps of the writing and publication process. So that means the early chapters describe the different types of papers and research considerations and settings for paper formatting. And the chapters in the middle cover grammar and mechanics of style, things like punctuation, italics, quotation marks. And then later chapters cover details about reporting your results and when you're creating tables and figures, and of course, citations and references. And then in the publication manual, there is a final chapter that's all about the publication process. So that's the layout of the chapters in the book. And then within the chapters, we have section numbers for easy reference. So, and these work well with the website. So when you look up information on the website, if your students are finding that an easy way to look up APA style information, the pages on our site are labeled with those same section numbers. So you can see that outlined in red on this slide here. And that shows where the information can be found in the publication manual. So you can use the website with the book or the ebook together, and the web pages contain the same information from the book. In the same basic information. Sometimes the manuals section has a little more information about a special case or an exception if you really need to dig in. So we also recommend using these section numbers with your students when you're giving feedback. So this can reinforce for students where the information is, how to use the manual, and also hopefully just saves you some time writing and rewriting the explanations. And for that, an aside here, we want to thank April Shantz, the University of West Florida, for sharing this tip with, I think, with Samantha recently. So one way to teach the use of reference books is to have students practice looking up different style-related guidance in the manual. So you could ask them to look up how to format a student title page or what fonts are acceptable, or really whatever you want to focus on. But it's less about, that exercise would be less about them memorizing the answer than about finding and understanding and getting familiar with the book and where that answer is, and adding post-it notes to things that they're going to look up frequently. So one last thing on this tip, another way that students can practice is by using our brand new instructional aid, the APA Style Manual Lookup Activity. Then you can see the QR code to access that, and it's also in the instructional aids section of our site. And that's the end of tip number 1.
Thanks, Tim. A couple people have mentioned in the chat that it is also, it's National Teachers Week, but also it's Nurses Week. So happy Nurses Week to all of the nurses and nurse educators on. And of course, happy Teachers Week to all the teachers. Our second tip is related to what Tim said, and it's about creating and using tip sheets to summarize the elements of APA style that students use the most in your class. So when we talk about a sheet of APA style tip, we don't mean like a stagnant summary that students use in place of the publication manual or concise guide. Instead, have your students create their own tip sheet, either as a group in a session alongside the manual lookup activity that Tim just mentioned, or over the course of your class, or even over the course of their degree program. In the psychology department at the University of West Florida, professors have students create their tip sheets over time, incorporating elements of APA style that each individual student uses the most. It can act as a running log of the APA style elements that are most important to them they need to remember. For example, if they get feedback on a paper where maybe they made a mistake with table formatting, they could add it to their sheet. Students shared that the process of creating their own APA style tip sheet was very helpful for them. If you wish to have students create like a class tip sheet as a group, you can start with the manual lookup activity that Tim mentioned and have students choose what elements of APA style they would like to include. It can be interesting to compare and contrast what students feel is important or particularly challenging about writing. What your tip sheet looks like will depend on how you're using APA style in your class. For example, if you're using APA style in an introductory writing course, then tips on crediting sources are important so students can learn to avoid plagiarism. If you're using it in maybe a research methods course, tips on presenting numbers and statistics are important. We know that you love seeing our examples, so we made a tip sheet appropriate for a beginner audience, covering paper format, inclusive language, and references. You can access it on our website on the instructional aids page or by visiting the QR code on your screen. And just a reminder, if you do have any trouble with the QR code, all of the resources that we're talking about today will be sent to you by email.
All right. So our third tip is to apply aspects of APA style writing to incremental writing. So that is the writing that students produce along the way to writing a full paper. For example, in a discussion board post, students should use the pronoun I to describe their own thoughts rather than referring to themselves in the third person. And this probably will come naturally in that context. And then that can be used to reinforce that that's also correct in a paper. And here I have a, should have kept the chat open. Here I have a blog post that I will throw in there quickly if you want to learn more about that. So students can also be asked to include citations and references as appropriate in a discussion post to reinforce that. Likewise, if students are building toward writing a research paper, they can use the manual to identify the parts of a paper that they need to write, like an introduction and supporting paragraphs and a conclusion, and then develop an outline for each section that they need to write. And to support this, the manual includes a sample student paper and a sample professional paper. And then the website includes both of those papers in full, as well as additional papers of different types, like literature review, discussion paper, mixed methods, and so on. And another APA style guideline that can be easily applied in incremental writing is to always use the serial comma before the last item in a list of 3 or more. So whereas in some writing styles, the serial comma is optional, APA style requires a serial comma because it clearly shows the separation between different items in a list, especially if that list is long or complicated. And it's easy to follow a consistent guideline to always use the serial comma. We believe that the serial comma provides clarity and reduces the cognitive load for all readers, which is an important consideration when writing with accessibility in mind. And one more link, I promise this will be the last one I'll put in the chat. That's a page that has a lot of great information about that topic. So an activity idea is to have an APA style guideline of the week that students can focus on during whatever they are writing that week. For example, you could ask them to focus on writing sentences with serial commas.
In addition to teaching how to use APA style in incremental writing, it can also be helpful to take an incremental approach to how APA style is taught in your department. We've heard from many instructors that they require students to know and use APA style in their course, but that there isn't a course where good writing practices in APA style are explicitly taught. We know that you can't always find time in a cramped syllabus to have an intensive course dedicated to writing. So teaching writing in APA style incrementally throughout the curriculum can be extremely helpful. Even if you do have a dedicated writing class, reinforcing those skills over time can really be helpful and improve information retention for students. One way to do this is to have a conversation with your department about what skills are required entering each course and what skills students will learn in each course. You can use this information to decide what elements of APA style and good writing skills can be taught throughout the curriculum. If your students are required to write a research paper in psychology research methods, for example, or maybe they're writing a research paper in an evidence-based practice nursing class, are there elements of APA style and good writing practices that can be taught in the foundational courses so students are better prepared once they get to these intermediate and advanced courses? For example, in an introductory level class, can students begin learning about inclusive language, writing with clarity and precision, or citing sources? Maybe you can fit in the manual lookup activity that Tim mentioned earlier, so students can use their publication manuals and concise guides more effectively. In subsequent classes, are there activities like writing in a discussion board that Tim mentioned, or reading through a journal article that can incorporate some instruction on one or more elements of APA style? We know that not every department can have these types of conversations, but by learning APA style along with other good writing skills over time, it helps set students up for success. It will allow them to chunk their learning over time into small pieces instead of being expected to learn everything at once while they're doing something difficult, like writing a research paper or doing their capstone project. For example, maybe you start with the basic principles of paper format, inclusive language, and references, and then as you advance in a curriculum such as psychology, you add guidance on how to present statistics. Hopefully, this will make APA style writing feel more like a habit than a set of rules that students have to apply while writing.
Okay, thank you. Our fifth tip has to do with creating references and their in-text citations. So APA style provides a wealth of reference examples on the website and in the manuals, and they are, in both cases, they're organized by type, which helps students find the example that best matches the particular work they're trying to cite. So if you have a magazine article, for example, you can use the periodicals template in chapter 10 to piece together the author, date, title, and source pieces of a reference, but we know that people really learn by comparing against other actual examples. So you can also look at some of the magazine article reference examples and compare those with the work, the article that you have that you're trying to create a reference for. But our tip here has to do with what happens when pieces are missing. So sometimes the work you want to cite doesn't clearly show one or more of the 4 elements that are typically included, and then it's hard to know what to do. So our advice in this situation is to cite what's there. Think about what information you do have, and that the reader who came to that, let's say, web page, based on your reference, what are they going to see? And then the reference should reflect the reality of what the work shows. So if information is missing, you're just not going to include it in the reference. For example, an online journal article that doesn't seem to have an issue number, you can often they're all laid out differently, right? So, but you can navigate to the table of contents for the journal. Sometimes the issue will be easy to find there, and then you put it in the reference. If not, without doing too much additional detective work, you can surmise that the journal just doesn't use issue numbers, and then just omit that issue number from the reference. And I think it's useful for students to learn 2 things from that publishers put this kind of information in different places, and it is worth making the effort to find it. But also that publishers differ in how they organize and label their information, and it is very possible to find that they just have not given it a volume or an issue number or other information, and that's okay. So for a final example of that, finding publication dates for online works can be tricky. And we recommend looking for the date that is specifically applicable to the content of the work that you're looking at on the web page. So if it says date created or last updated, that's a great date to use in your reference. But you don't have to go digging if you can't find a date. You don't have to look through the source code, which is something we've been asked about. And we don't recommend using the copyright date at the footer of a web page, because that generally applies to just every page across the website and not necessarily to the content of what you were actually trying to cite. So if it's not clear when something was published, just use N period, D period in the reference, which stands for no date. So again, the overall style tip here is to remember that the purpose of the reference is to identify the work for the reader in a predictable way, so they can find the work and verify that it matches the reference that you are actually talking about. And tip 6 is, again, about references, specifically finding the reference example that you need. So APA style references, to find the reference that matches the source you need, focus on the type of document that it is, which examples are on the left column there. It's a journal article, or it's a YouTube video, or it's a social media post. Not that the retrieval method is how you got the work, and that doesn't usually make a difference to the reference. So you found it on the internet, or you found it in a research database that only your class has access to because your library provides it to you. In the reference, you're going to be citing the book that you found, so that someone else looking at that reference can find that same book. They may just find it in a different way. So you may have read it on an ebook, and then they may borrow it from their library. And this is why, in general, the reference templates don't include links to databases, at least not by default, but I'll come back to that in our last tip.
So if you're going to require APA style for your class, then it's a good idea to use APA style when writing your classroom material. And I believe somebody put that in the chat, so somebody was way ahead of us with our tip. For example, when creating your course syllabus, indicate what APA style resources you expect students to use and provide references for them in APA style. There is no APA style for syllabi. It's more about applying the aspects of APA style that are relevant whenever you can, such as the serial, comma, legible and inclusive font, or I'm sorry, legible and accessible fonts, and the use of inclusive language.
Okay, tip 8 is something that should be reassuring for students. That is, if you're writing a paper using common word processing software, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, the defaults are going to apply to APA style. So the default fonts and margins are acceptable for APA style papers, and you can easily set the line spacing to be double spaced, and you can apply the page numbers. And in addition, if you've used APA as academic writer, your paper's format settings default to APA style. And then tip 9, if you ask students to use APA style in your course, if you put that in your syllabus or instructions, it can help to provide details about what your specific expectations are. So some instructors are thinking about references and citations, and then others might say use APA style, meaning that, but also meaning use the bias-free language guidelines and mechanics of style. So to go back to the discussion post example, if you set expectations for whether writing with APA style means using serial commas in the discussion, or does it also mean you want citations and references in the discussion post? Students aren't always sure how to apply and adapt the guidelines that are for papers into this new context. In addition, you may want to adapt some guidelines to fit your needs for your classroom, and the guidelines in the manual are written for authors writing professional papers, but also for students writing class papers. But we appreciate that each classroom is unique, and you may need to adjust some of the guidelines to meet your needs. So for example, if you know that you and your class all have access to a database that you're recommending they use and find works in, you may want to ask your students to include links to that database in the references. That would be a variation from APA style, because those links wouldn't work for people outside of your class, but it's okay. If you want students to include them for your convenience and their convenience, it probably just helps to let them know that that is an exception, and that they would do something differently if they were, submitting to a publisher. So Likewise, if you're preparing a work in APA style that will be read online only, we recommend that you put links beneath the descriptive text, as you can see on the screen here, rather than in a parentheses, rather than having the URL in parentheses. And this is for improving the accessibility of work to be read online.
Before we get to your questions, which I can see we have a lot of great questions coming into the Q&A, so you can start putting those in the Q&A section if you'd like. But we want to share our recommendations for the sources you should use to teach, learn, and apply APA style. So first, we recommend you use the authoritative sources for APA style, which include the publication manual, 7th edition, the concise guide to APA style, 7th edition, and the APA style website, which you can visit at apastyle.org. We've heard from the manager of a writing center that they recommend official APA resources at their writing center because they want to ensure that they are getting information straight from the source and that nothing gets lost in translation or goes out of date. I also saw in the QA and also in the chat some questions about the concise guide. It's blurred out, but take my word for it, it's there. And the concise guide is geared more toward an undergraduate audience. So a lot of the tips that are in the publication manual surrounding using publishing your work and things that are used at kind of a higher level are not in the concise guide. So you can have students use either one. If you're teaching more of an introductory class, you may find the concise guide suits your needs maybe a little bit more, but you could get a desk copy for either of these guides on our website. So next slide. Sorry. As you've probably noticed, as we mentioned some throughout the presentation, we have many free instructional aids on our website. These are great for classroom use and include tutorials and webinars, including this one, handouts, guides, and sample papers. It can be helpful to encourage students to use a resource appropriate for their level. The handouts and guides are short and great for a beginner audience. The concise guide is geared toward an early undergraduate audience, like I just mentioned, and the publication manual is fantastic for intermediate undergraduate use and beyond. And again, you can check out all of these sources on our website. We have a good description and table of contents if you're looking to see what might be most helpful for you or your student. So there was also a question about inclusive language. For more information on inclusive language, check out our two main resources, the Bias-Free Language Guidelines and the Inclusive Language Guide. You can visit both of these resources on the APA style website or by scanning the QR codes on your screen. Remember, we're also going to be sending all of these out, so you don't have to grab the QR code right away. The Bias-Free Language Guidelines contain general principles for avoiding bias in language that can be applied to any situation, along with specific examples. And the Inclusive Language Guidelines are a glossary of specific examples that expand on the Bias-Free Language Guidelines. We also recommend the Mastering APA Style Student Workbook, 7th edition, which is an all-digital workbook that teaches APA style through applied practice. It pairs with either the publication manual or concise guide, and we offer bundled versions where either the pub manual or concise guide are linked to the workbook. If you're an instructor and you adopt this for your course, you also get access to teacher resources such as the Learning Dashboard, which allows you to see where your students may need help, and the gradebook, which allows you to see your students' grades on 28 quizzes. Another product to be aware of, and I think somebody also mentioned it in the chat, is Academic Writer, which is APA's online writing platform. You can learn APA style through interactive lessons, create, save, and manage references, and write papers in APA style. It helps students learn APA style as they write and focus less on formatting and more on the content of their paper, as it helps them format automatically. Again, all of the information that you might need on these products can be found on our website. So let's take a little recap, just a sense for how confident that you feel about APA style, putting APA style now into practice after hearing those tips. So do you feel like you still need more help? You plan to incorporate any of these tips into your curriculum? Maybe you plan to incorporate many tips. Let us know. And thank you all so much for participating. It's great to see that you guys are so actively engaged.
We'll leave the poll open for just a few more seconds. I can see your results rolling in. All right, we're going to end the poll, and here you should be able to see the results on the screen. So we've got about 8% who said, I still need more help. That's cool. We can definitely still help you. About 46% who say they plan to incorporate a few tips from the webinar, and about 50% who plan to incorporate many tips from this webinar. So that's great to hear. We're always, we gain so much from you all who are the users of APA style. So your feedback is really important to us. Now we will have time for a Q&A. I saw there were lots of questions accumulating in the Q&A box. Okay. Samantha, did you want to dole out the questions?
Yes, absolutely. So we do have a lot of really great questions coming out. See some of the ones that I was looking at. So there are a lot of questions in the chat about the ability to use first person and not just using third person. So it seems like that surprised a couple of people, or it's a habit to always write in third person. Could either of you talk anything about that?
Yes, absolutely. The guideline to refer to yourself in the first person. So that means if you're writing something by yourself, you use I. And if you have co-authors, you're writing in a group, you would use we. Has been that way for as long as I know of. And the reason for it is that when you're reporting the results of research, it's you, the scientist who's done something, and you're sharing your work with others who were in your field. And like, if you become a scientist and you have a long career, like you get to know those people, you meet them. And so it really is, they're publications, but they're also in a way like a conversation among different scientists. And that conversation evolves the science as people respond to other ideas. So we really want to dispel the idea that you should refer to yourself as the author. Like, it's clearer if you just say I or we. It's definitely clearer.
Somebody asked, when we're developing the APA style guide, what are some of the things we decide on tweaking between issues? So how do we decide what we're going to change and what kind of changes should take place between versions of the publication manual? Tim, would you like to answer that one?
Sure, I can try. So we get a lot of feedback. Some feedback from people saying, I wish you did this, I wish you did that, or I wish it covered this thing that you don't cover. But we also get feedback just in terms of what is the common question? In the last couple months, I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear that it's been how you cite ChatGPT. So we see that that's been of course, that's an unusual example, but we see the questions that come in the most, and we realize, oh, we need to refine that. So that was the process for the 7th edition. In part, there's also, we work with committees of experts on topics like the bias-free language guidelines and for publishing practices and ethics in publishing. So we have those sort of scientific committees throughout the span of the lifespan of the manual, and we're constantly making notes about what should we do, and of course now it's lovely that we can update things on the website and clarify things and add more examples on the blog and on the site as well.
Thanks, Tim. We also have a question here. I teach freshmen and sophomore students who have already used a variety of formatting styles, including MLA and Chicago style. Although I am in the psychology field and prefer APA, I usually let them choose their formatting style. Is there learning value in promoting APA specifically for all students, regardless of career choice? Chelsea, would you like to answer that one?
Oh, for sure. I think there's so much value in APA style. There's some aspects that are fairly equivalent no matter what writing style you use. Like any writing style is going to have guidelines on like how you should format your paper, or like what a reference should look like. And those are largely just, most of that is just a preference. But there are aspects of APA style that I do think distinguish it from other writing styles. One of the aspects of APA style that's really important is our information on inclusive language. So because it's a writing style just for psychology and also is used in nursing and education, you're writing about people. And when you're writing about people, it's super important that you use words that treat people with dignity and respect. And what's really cool is that since APA style comes from the American Psychological Association, we have a whole EDI office, which is Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And they help spearhead work with real people and like the science with real people, as well as finding experts who are going to give their recommendations on what kind of language to use when you're describing people. And so our recommendations for language aren't arbitrary. They're ultimately coming from the people themselves. And then, we work on them so that they're delivered in a clear way that people can use. So the bias-free language and inclusive language resources linked earlier in this webinar would be great to check out for that. And the other aspect of APA style that I think makes it great is that in the in-text citations, you have both the author and the year, whereas in MLA style, it doesn't have the year. Including the year in the in-text citation allows you to see how old the source is. And when you're writing in science, psychology, nursing, education, whatnot, the age of the source is relevant. So you can see, is this new? Is it cutting edge? You can see like, oh, when was this field established? Maybe it's 50 years old. You can tell that just from the in-text citation, and you wouldn't get that if you were, for example, writing in MLA style, which is really well suited to English, where it's like literature and it's always relevant, versus science that's evolving.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. We also have, it looks like 3 or 4, maybe even more questions regarding ChatGPT. Tim, would you mind talking a little bit about what we've provided in terms of guidance with regard to ChatGPT? And somebody also asked for an ETA on any sort of future communication on ChatGPT or other kind of AI guidance.
Sure. Yeah, we did recently post on our blog about it, to answer the very specific question about, how do you cite this? If you have used ChatGPT to create some text that you're putting in your paper, so that guidance is there. It follows the software template, if you're familiar with that, from section 1010, I believe. And but to the many other larger questions about using ChatGPT, we are really still listening to what instructors are doing, what publishers are doing, and it is still going to be a learning process for that. And I think that we are where we are for right now, and APA Journals as a publisher has also been discussing it, and we will be following their lead as well on what they come up with for recommendations.
Great, thank you so much, Tim. And it looks like several people have read your blog post already, which is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so somebody asked, how do you cite and reference a document by 4 organizations as authors? Chelsea, would you like to take that one?
Oh, that's actually really straightforward. You would just write organization A, comma, organization B, comma, organization C, comma, and organization D, and then a period. So that would be in the reference. You list the 4 organizations with commas in between, which is the serial comma. And then in the in-text citation, because there are 4 organizations, you would use the name of the first organization plus et al. So it would be organization A et al, comma, and then the year of the work. So it's not much different from citing a work that has 4 people as authors.
Thanks so much. So regarding precision, do you have any suggestions on how to provide specificity without creating wordiness, or about how to talk about wordiness versus required level of specificity, which sometimes requires more words? Students often say that they've been drilled to not be too wordy. So Chelsea, what are your thoughts on that?
That's definitely true. It's tough. I think one thing to look for would be adverbs. So if you have, so obviously adverbs are modifying a verb. So if it's hard to conjure up examples off the top of your head, but like if instead of saying he walked quickly down the street, you could say like he ran down the street. Like, can you look for adverbs in your paper, words usually ending in ly, and then see what verb are they modifying, and then figure out what's a better verb that I could just use one word instead of 2. And finding what that better verb might be is tough, because it's going to rely on their vocabulary, familiarity, but you could use resources like a thesaurus or a dictionary to come up with ideas. Another thing that you could do would be to get examples from students' work and to go through them as a class and talk about ways that you could refine those particular sentences. And so in the same way that you looked for maybe adverbs, you could look for adjectives plus nouns and say, is there a more specific noun that we could use in this case? That's where I would start.
Thanks so much. Go ahead, Tim.
Sorry, I think there's something to be said for the editing, writing, and then revision process too. Like if you write it the first time, if you give yourself time, which I know is hard as a student, to reread it the next day before it's due, sometimes those things just jump out at you more readily, as you've the organization and the redundancy is a little more clear when you've had a minute to step away from it.
Awesome, great, thank you. It looks like we have a couple of different questions regarding integrating the resources with your LMS system and things like that. So the resources that we've shared, you could obviously put links in the LMS to those specific resources. Also, if you do require like an ebook version of the publication manual or concise guide, you can link different chapters of those books through Vital Source or Red Shelf, wherever you're getting those from. And Academic Writer and the Mastering APA Style workbook can both be integrated into the LMS. So it's definitely a great idea when you're teaching APA Style to put various materials in the LMS that you're using. So a couple people have asked about some of our, sorry, I'm just trying to find the question I was looking at. Some of our web pages and how often we are updating our web pages. For example, there were questions about the bias-free language guidelines and things like that. So how often do we go in and make changes, and how up to date can they consider those resources? Tim, would you like to take that one?
Sure. As needed, I guess I would say. I mean, the guidance there is from the manual specifically. So we have updated, references when the links go out of date. We've updated things when people tell us, they could use more clarity. For the bias-free language guidelines specifically, we did update that with a link to the inclusive language guide, which is, they're meant to work together. Those are likely to be updated more frequently than the bias-free language guidelines. And trying to think of what else we've updated recently. I mean, the blog is obviously the most up to date. Trying to think if I'm forgetting anything about that. I guess we take our lead from people who write us and say that they want something or need something or something, a link is broken.
Great, thanks so much. Somebody asked, why are titles lowercase on APA reference pages? It's widely a common mistake that students do because titles have always been taught to be capitalized. I would like to give some context to give students on this rationale. Tim or Chelsea?
I would say it's I'm trying to multitask here and find the link, but we have a blog post about that will explain it better than I probably can here in a sentence or two. But one of the points in that post was about how it's more accessible. One moment here, I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, I think it was to do with reading, like reading just a standard sentence with sentence capitalization was the people who picked the guideline long before any of us were even born thought it was easier to read. And so like that's an example of a guideline that's been that way since APA style started in 1929. So like we're coming up on almost 100 years. And we definitely have heard that feedback with like frequently and like see your point, but we also you have to weigh on what happens if you change it and what kind of effects will that have. And so that's a great example actually of the kind of guideline that when it comes time to update the style, which is not happening like anytime soon, when it comes time to make a new edition, that's the kind of thing that we talk about, to say like what are the pros and cons of leaving something the way it is, and what are the pros and cons of changing it. And there's arguments to be made both ways. It's complicated.
I just put that in the chat too, and just to add to what Chelsea said, that it started that way for like books and journal articles, and then as the editions happened, more and more types of documents are included in the examples that people are citing. People are citing YouTube now, so for a sense of consistency, it also grew in a consistent way.
Thank you, guys. So Alan asks, are publications outside of APA, such as the APA manual Made Easy, legit? Can these be used by students, or are their use discouraged? So for this question, the answer is we don't know, and that's kind of what makes it a little bit difficult. So our information provided in the publication manual and concise guide is available for sometimes instructors will make like a guide to using that, but we don't review any of that material. So it's really hard for us to distinguish between what might be a good resource where somebody, created something really helpful, and what might be something that is, a piracy issue or something like that. So we recommend our own sources, not just to give ourselves a pat on the back, but because these are the only things that we really know are up to date, that are accurate, that are legitimate, because these are the things that we're creating. We can't really review all of the other books and sources that are out there. So the only things we can really stand behind are the things that we created. Chelsea and Tim, anything to add on that?
No, I think that's great. That's great. Yeah, if it's coming from us, it's on our website at apastyle.org. And if it's coming from us, you know that we've done the best we can to give you the most complete and accurate information that we can about APA style. And we really hope that you use our stuff. And there's tons of free stuff on the APA style website for you to use.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah.
So we just have a few more minutes. Jeff asked, if one insists on referring to Black and brown people, should brown be capitalized? Chelsea, would you like to take that question?
I think it's trending that way. I think it's trending toward capitalizing. Yeah. There's a difference with racial and ethnic related terms. In APA style, you capitalize them. In other writing styles, ones that refer to places such as like Asian would be capitalized, but so in AP style, which is used in journalism, white is lowercase and Black is capped, but APA style capitalizes Black and white. So by that principle, I think you would capitalize brown as well. But that's definitely an evolving issue that's happening, but I think it makes sense to cap it.
Great, thank you so much, Chelsea. Laurie said a high school teacher made up an infographic on certain aspects of APA for use with her students. Does APA have any thought of doing that? Infographics are great to use and post. So I totally agree with you. Infographics are awesome. And we are always kind of working with various teachers and professors to create the handouts that we've shared with you today. So if you see something fantastic and can reach out to that teacher and tell them to send it to us, we'd love to kind of make a connection with them and see if we can make things like that available to a larger group. We're working on lots of different ways to make our content accessible, and we have a lot of great guides available. So if you see something where one of your colleagues creates just a fantastic guide or something like that, we always want to see it. And you can write to us. We have an email address that's styleexpert@apa.org. It's right over there. So I don't think we have any infographics right now, but we are always working on new things. And if somebody has one created, we'd love to see it.
Actually, there is an infographic on the website. I think there's only one, but it's about 6 steps to proper citation.
Yeah.
And we can dig up the link and send it to you. Before we wrap up, I actually had one question that I saw that's really relevant to another webinar we did just yesterday. The person is a librarian at a high school and would like to introduce APA style to grades 8 through 12, and saying like, obviously I want to simplify it for the lower grades. Do you think this is too ambitious? Or is there teaching and learning material that's specifically for the high school level? And that is a highly relevant question. So glad that you asked, because we just conducted a webinar called Preparing Your High School Students to Use APA Style. And although it's already happened, it's going to be posted on our website in the instructional aid section. So you'll be able to watch a recording of that webinar about preparing high schoolers to use APA style. And additionally, the instructional aids that we mentioned in this webinar about the manual lookup activity and the tip sheet, Those are both great for a beginner high school audience. And also in the works, we are going to be developing a landing page on our website for a high school audience. And that's going to be coming sometime during this summer.
Awesome. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. It's been great to have such a lively chat and Q&A, and it's been fantastic to have the opportunity to talk